These are obvious, like no rain or chance of lightning in the recovery zone. That's both for the safety of the crew inside the capsule and the crew on the recovery teams on the water. So we're also looking for wind speeds less than 15 feet a second, or about 10 miles per hour, and relatively calm seas so we can safely execute the recovery operations. That includes
Dragon SpaceX, deorbit burn complete. Performance was nominal. Nose cone closure initiated.
Endurance copy is nominal burn, and we see the same thing with the nose cone closure in progress.
All right, good news. Deorbit burn is complete. That 7-minute, 45-second burn. They are committed to coming home, and that splashdown, again, we're looking for in less than 30 minutes from now. They also mentioned the nose cone will be closing. The 4 forward bulkhead thrusters that were just used for the deorbit burn, we won't use those again. And so the nose cone can close and protect the hatch underneath. That's the hatch that they used once they arrived at the space station and to get on and off the space station. But tonight, whenever they exit the vehicle, they will exit out the side hatch, which is the one they used when they entered the capsule about 6 months ago.
So that's a live view of that nose cone closing. Like Leah said, those 4 Draco thrusters located at the forward end of Dragon will no longer be utilized, so we are closing the nose cone to protect them, as well as the forward hatch. So that's the hatch that was utilized to dock and undock with the station.
That was pretty cool. I'm not sure I've seen that before.
Yeah, that looked like a new view to me as well.
In the background, Dragon is inhibiting those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete the deorbit burn, and that makes sure it's safe to latch the nose cone shut for reentry. Also, the vehicle has initiated the nitrox suit purge. That'll help keep Raja, Tom, Kayla, and Matthias cool and comfortable during reentry. We're looking for that to come up in about 20 minutes. So again, the nose cone is closing, protecting the forward hatch, and our 4 astronauts are using their screens to monitor the locking of the nose cone, which is done by a set of hooks.
So as you can tell, we're getting excited. We're getting closer and closer to bringing this crew home. The nose cone, as we just saw, was closing. And that is basically the final very up-close view there, as you can see, of that nose cone closing. So we're expecting that to complete in just about another minute from now. As we said before, this is basically the protection of that of the forward hatch as well as the forward Draco thrusters. This is basically the final physical change, the big physical change that Dragon will undergo prior to re-entry. So we've already jettisoned the trunk, and now with the closure of the nose cone, Dragon is in its final I'll say final exterior physical state, because obviously there's some like interior physical state differences as you know, the system gets ready to re-enter. So we're almost done with that nose cone closure. We should hear call out for that any moment from our team located there at SpaceX Mission Control Center.
And we also have the vehicle positioned properly so that the heat shield is what will face toward the atmosphere whenever it's coming in. That heat shield will protect the rest of the vehicle and ablate some of that heat that's coming in. How hot did you say it gets in?
3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. It's pretty warm.
Very toasty. I'm a usually cold person, but I don't think I'd go that hot.
Yeah, as you said, Dragon has initiated the suit purge and the environment purge of that nitrox. So we are actively cooling the air around the astronauts. So they'll stay really comfortable inside Crew Dragon, even though the exterior gets up to 3,500 degrees. I do want to note that as a result of that temperature, that's not true. It's not a result of that temperature. It's a result of the fact that as Dragon is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere at such a high speed, it actually forms a shock wave at the base of the heat shield, and lots of science happens, and basically there's ionization of the particles around the Dragon capsule, and it'll get so condensed and hot that it'll form plasma around the side of it. So that's why once we see Dragon after splashdown, it'll look a little toasty. But as a result of that plasma, we won't be able to communicate with the crew. That plasma basically prevents any radio frequencies to go in or out. We are unable to command Dragon to do anything, but it's actually a really good thing because the Earth's atmosphere is acting as that initial braking system for the Dragon capsule to slow it down from that orbital velocity of 17,500 miles per hour. So we are expecting that blackout period. Last that we heard, the teams were able to calculate that to begin at the 30-minute mark and end at the 37-minute mark. So depending on your time zone, you're in a different hour. So for us, that will be at 9:30 p.m. Pacific to 9:37 p.m. Pacific. So about a 7-minute blackout period, totally normal. You'll hear it called out as LOS, which means loss of signal. And then, after that period, the teams here in Hawthorne will try to establish communication with the crew. But realistically, hopefully by then, we'll have views from that WB plane that you mentioned earlier with a thermal camera to, catch a view of Dragon as it is doing that reentry.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And you mentioned the atmosphere doing the beginning of the work to slow Crew Dragon down. After it re-enters the atmosphere, we'll have a series of parachutes.
Yeah.
The first 2 are drogue chutes. These help pull out the next 4, which are the main parachutes, and that'll continue slowing Crew Dragon down until it splashes down safely in the water off the coast of Tampa.
Yeah.
Again, the SPAS boats will first approach the capsule, make sure there aren't any dangerous fumes coming off of it, and then the Shannon, the newest named recovery boat, will make its way toward the capsule itself. They will lift the capsule up into a nest, is what it's called, and the best way to describe it. On the boat, they will pull it toward the center of the boat where there's a platform for the astronauts to be helped out of the capsule. They'll get out, they'll have some medical checks, just some routine checks after spending 6 months in space, and then they will take a helicopter off of the ship all the way to shore, where they will board another NASA jet back to Houston. So it's a very fast return.
Yeah. So the point being is that when they land in the water, that's, big picture, it's the last leg home, but more of the macro or smaller picture, micro picture, the journey's not done. There's several more steps that they have to go through before they are reunited with their families and back on solid ground. So yeah, we're expecting all of that, we will probably end our webcast before the helicopter, but it shows up. But in any case, there's a lot of dynamic stuff coming up. We are expecting to hear call out for completion of the nose cone closure. And that is the final major physical change of Dragon prior to that deorbit.
It felt like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be on board when Crew 2 came back into the atmosphere, and seeing them come streaking through the atmosphere was...
Dragon SpaceX, nose cone is secured for entry.
Endurance Cappy's nose cone closed.
All right, so there we heard that call out from SpaceX core Sarah Gillis and forming the crew that nose cone closure is complete. So that was all basically the first half of reentry. As we begin the second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to inject the cooled nitrox into the air being delivered to the suits worn by Raja, Tom, Kayla, and Matthias. Again, this is what will allow the crew to remain comfortable while external temperatures reach that 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat shield is pointing forward, basically leading the capsule to the landing site, which, as I mentioned before, we are targeting off the coast of Tampa, Florida for landing today. Now, speaking of the heat shield, Crew Dragon's primary heat shield is comprised of PICA 3.0, which stands for Phenolic Impregnated Carbon Ablator. First-gen PICA was first developed by NASA for studying and sampling comets within our solar system.
So SpaceX partnered with NASA to develop PICA X, which was the second-gen product used on all of the Dragon 1 commercial resupply missions that successfully resupplied the station on 20 missions. But PICA 3.0 was developed specifically for use on Dragon 2 crew and cargo, with enhanced structural and thermal properties that optimized the heat shield and drove down the cost and mass. Always a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. The remainder of the Crew Dragon capsule is composed primarily of a SpaceX proprietary ablator ablative material. It's another class of thermal protection which is lighter weight versus Pica and protects the underlying composite structure during reentry to ensure the structural capabilities of the capsule are maintained.
So while Crew Dragon will experience temperatures over 3,000 degrees during peak reentry conditions, the characteristics of the TPS, or the thermal protection systems, coupled with the ECLIS, environmental cooling and life support system, in the pressurized interior will ensure that Raja, Tom, Kayla, and Matthias stay cool and comfortable during all phases of reentry through splashdown.
Yeah, so it's important stuff. It sounds like a lot of words, but basically the main job is to take the heat that is being experienced by the capsule and dissipate it. It's a protective barrier. Now, after Crew Dragon Endurance has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, a series of parachutes will deploy to slow the crew's descent. First will be the 2 drogue chutes, followed by the 4 main chutes to guide Crew Dragon to its first contact with Earth since launching in November of last year. Dragon will automatically deploy these parachutes when different pressure and positioning sensors on the capsule detect that they're at the right speed and altitude.
The vehicle velocity at the drogue deploy is approximately 350 miles per hour. So that's a lot better than that 17,500 before it re-enters the atmosphere. So 350 is quite a bit slower, but the drogues will deploy at about 18,000 feet. So those drogues help slow the capsule to 119 miles per hour, and that's about when the main parachutes deploy, so about 6,500 feet. And that's going to slow the capsule down. The vehicle velocity at the water splashdown is about 16 miles per hour, so much nicer cruise than that orbital velocity. But the highest G load the crew will experience during reentry is around 3 to 5 Gs.
In my opinion, it's too many.
It does seem like a lot after spending, 6 months in almost zero.
Yeah, but I'm also the person that is happy to not ride the roller coaster and hold everybody's belongings and wait for them at the exit. So.
We should go to a theme park together because I'm on the roller coaster.
Happy to do so. So for those of you that are just joining us, we have we have jettisoned the trunk, we have closed the nose cone, we have positioned Dragon into the right position, basically having that heat shield face forward lead the Dragon capsule for reentry, and we have completed the deorbit burn. So next up is the actual reentry itself and the communications blackout.
Yeah, we have about 15 minutes until the entry interface period. We again anticipate that loss of signal. This is something that always happens. It's a side effect of that plasma buildup, but we know we will regain that communications once they have slowed down and exited that plasma. We will see the drogue chutes deploy shortly after, which will pull out our mains. We'll see splashdown, and fingers crossed we'll have views of this from our WB-57 and potentially from the recovery boat Shannon as well.
Once again, we are targeting a landing off the coast of Florida in the where we have Shannon positioned around the Tampa area.
Dragon SpaceX for entry briefing.
Interns ready to copy entry.
Copy, Raja. At this time, I have no changes to timeline for you. Same anticipated blackout start and stop times as I briefed before. We are not tracking any vehicle issues at this time. And so far as weather goes, we are still looking great. There is a slight increase in wind speed at 7 knots from what I last reported, but we have calm seas and are ready to get you out of the water. How copy?
Copy, no timeline changes, so still second blackout is 4:30 and 4:37. No vehicle issues, and then little change in the winds from 3 to 7 knots, but still calm seas, and still go on the recovery team.
That's a good read back.
So there on your screen, that was SpaceX core, Sarah Gillis, just letting the crew know that everything is still looking good. No change in the calculated timeline for that loss of signal, or LOS, as you hear it called. You can see on your screen there, the crowd here at SpaceX headquarters is starting to grow slightly as we get closer to that splashdown. It is a little late. The second shift is currently working right now, but I expect to see more people there as we get a little closer to splashdown itself.
Yeah, this is some of the most exciting stuff. And we're coming up on some of the most dynamic parts of the mission. So we're coming up on about 12 minutes until entry interface, which means we're around 14 minutes until that comm blackout, and less than 30 minutes now to splashdown. So again, we'll be off the coast of Tampa. And this was determined thanks to careful analysis, not even just yesterday and today, but over the past week or so, teams looking at the weather forecasts and determining the best opportunities for us to target to bring these astronauts home after it's been 175 days for them on the space station, but 177 days for them in space in total.
As we said before, we have 7 different possible locations to retrieve the crew from. We down select based on the weather conditions and criteria that have to be met. So as Leah mentioned before, we select a primary and an alternative site, and we are targeting Tampa as that prime spot. But having 7 sites allows greater flexibility to say, okay, so for example, if the Atlantic coast is, if there's a hurricane rolling through, as often does in Florida at certain times of the year, if there's a hurricane that just rolled through, that might mess up weather and sea states on the Atlantic side, but the Gulf side might be super calm. So by having 7 different spots around the panhandle of Florida, it does allow us to make assessments and have better availability for those return opportunities.
And of course, these crew members have spent all this time on the space station. They didn't just go up and come home, and so they left behind 7 other people on the space station. Crew 4 arrived about a week ago, and those astronauts took this past week to have a handover period with our Crew 3 astronauts. So Crew 3 is showing them all of the ropes on the space station, everything they need to know, especially for our newbies that are on Crew 4. But currently on the space station, Crew 4 is Chell Lindgren, Bob Hines, Jessica Watkins, and Samantha Cristoforetti. Samantha Cristoforetti is an Italian astronaut. She is from the European Space Agency. And then we also have the Soyuz crew of Roscosmos cosmonauts. That's Sergei Korsakov, Oleg Artemyev, and Denis Matveev.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a full house while Crew 3 was still up there.
Oh, yes.
I could imagine that even with a week to do those handover activities, that it was super busy, right? There is so much science experiments that are being conducted on station. So having time to walk through your replacement, all your lab notes, what you got to do next, how to do this, that kind of thing. And it's just amazing to me that they actually get it all done within a week.
Yes.
So I'm sure there's, traditions for new astronauts on station as well. So, allowing the celebration for new people to arrive, welcome to space, all those kinds of things, as well as the work part of actually doing a crew handover. I can understand why a full week is needed, because it sounds really busy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Crew Dragon is able to bring home some of those science experiments that the teams have worked on. They have polar freezers. And I mentioned I got to go to the Crew 2 splashdown. On our helicopter flight back to land, we had those polar freezers in the helicopter with us. So it's a really quick return, not only just for the astronauts, but also for that science back to the researchers here on the ground so they can analyze the work that's been done. And it was pretty amazing. I was like, oh my goodness, this was in space a few hours ago, and this is what the astronauts have been working on all this time. So I love that we prioritize not just their safe return, but also the safe return of this research that's been done for the betterment of us all.
At this point in time, we're about 10 minutes away from the anticipated loss of signal. That entry will begin just a minute later at 9:31 p.m. Pacific time. We expect to get that signal back at 9:37 p.m. Pacific, so just a brief period of lack of communication. As I said before, that's due to the re-entry of the capsule through the Earth's atmosphere. It's actually doing us a favor by the heat shield doing its job of braking, not B-R-E-A-K, but
B-R-A-K.
Yeah. Basically allowing the capsule to slow down by using the Earth's atmosphere as that initial braking process. It really helps us to not have to build bigger, heavier parachutes, which in space everything is about weight, is about mass, and so the atmosphere is doing us a favor. Unfortunately, it does mean that, as you said very well before, the side effect is that loss of signal, because as the air is basically densifying because of the shock wave that's forming underneath the heat shield, that plasma builds up on the side, the exterior gets to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and unfortunately we're unable to send any communications in or out of the capsule, but I believe we should have views of, at least thermal views of the capsule prior to that AOS or acquisition of signal. At least that's how it's kind of happened in the past. We get to see them, and then we'll hear the Corps call out to the crew to reestablish that communication.
And even though we won't have signal from Dragon, it's still doing its job. This is a fully autonomous vehicle. It doesn't require commands from the ground at that time, and it doesn't require any commands from the astronauts at that time either, though they're still able to monitor the performance of the vehicle. So it should only be, like you mentioned, about 6 or 7 minutes that we don't have comms with them, but it's amazing too. The vehicle's coming through so fast that if you're nearby, you can hear 2 sonic booms once it enters the atmosphere. So they're making their grand re-entry and arrival.
That must have been so cool to see.
It is genuinely one of the things I will never forget.
Awesome.
It was amazing.
That's very cool. So we are about 7 minutes away from that anticipated loss of signal. You mentioned before, Dragon is flying itself. It's completely autonomous. And realistically speaking, there shouldn't be much that Dragon has to do during that reentry anyway, because it's really that deorbit burn that puts it on that precise trajectory to the designated landing spot. So as we saw several minutes ago at this point, the 4 forward Draco thrusters were firing at very specific. It wasn't just all 4 of them firing all at once, all the time. There were some more impulse type burns, and that's really Dragon calculating for itself exactly what it needs to do. And at the completion of that deorbit burn, it was on that precise trajectory. So we're excited to bring the crew home. Like we said before, they're going from 17,500 miles per hour. That's their rough orbital velocity. The atmosphere will slow them down to about 350 miles per hour. That's when our drogue parachutes will deploy. At that point, they'll be at about 18,000 feet above the ocean surface. And then the drogue parachutes will continue to significantly slow the vehicle down. At the 6,000 feet altitude, the main parachutes will deploy. We've got 4 of those. Those are the super iconic orange and white parachutes that everybody loves to see. And what's really incredible is that the drogue parachutes do so much work during that initial phase between 18,000 feet and 6,000 feet that we don't. If we didn't have the drogue parachutes, those main parachutes would have to be much bigger in order to slow the vehicle down enough to make a soft landing. They're only going about 10-15 miles per hour whenever they make contact with the ocean surface.
Those drogues are small but mighty.
Yes.
So again, we're standing by for the beginning of entry interface. That will kick off the rest of the deorbit procedures until we have splashdown. Last time we saw our crew members, they were in their suits, so that is a just-in-case procedure, essentially. That would be just in case the cabin were to depressurize.
Is complete with crew entry prep. Visors are down.
Copy, Raja. Tablets secure, restraints are down, and visors are closed. Additionally, can you confirm that your satchel is fully zipped?
It is now.
Copy that. We are less than 4 minutes to anticipated LOS. We will talk to you on the other side at 4:37.
Sounds good. We'll talk to you then.
Perfect timing with your comment, Leah. You were just saying that they're in their suits, and there we heard the call out that their visors are down. So
yes.
That basically means that their suit is then closed off to the interior environment of Dragon. That is, we require them to do that during the more dynamic events while in Dragon. So obviously during liftoff and during re-entry, that would of course be. That was a great call out by the Corps, Sarah Gillis. It sounded like they were able to see via one of the interior camera views that his satchel was not completely zippered. So I loved that little reminder.
Yeah, they made sure that the cabin is configured for re-entry. So that means everything is stowed. They would have done that a little while ago before they got in their seats and strapped up and connected their umbilicals. But don't want a lot flying around in the cabin while they are re-entering. So everything is secured. That includes the tablets that they use to review procedures. But they can still see the status of the vehicle via those 3 screens in the middle. So we are getting closer. She mentioned just a few minutes until we have communications blackout. And we expect to hear from them again in about 10 minutes.
Yeah. Now, you said before that they're going to experience about 3 to 5 Gs during this re-entry period. So if you've been on a roller coaster, you can imagine it's like that point where after you initially go up and that drop whenever you come back down, it's that feeling that they're going to have for a few minutes, I should say.
Yeah, and when they get back, of course, like we mentioned, they're going to have those routine medical checks. So these are recovery. These are medical checks that we do as well with astronauts who fly on a Soyuz vehicle. Of course, those are not taking place on a ship. Those are in the steppes of Kazakhstan. They will set up a medical tent and evaluate the crew members and sometimes do scientific research when it comes to things like balance. And so they'll do some of the same things here. They'll make sure the crew is feeling good before they take them, put them on the helicopter, and send them back to land.
Makes sense. After they splash down and are recovered from the water, we'll see them lifted onto that recovery vessel, Shannon. And once the side hatch is opened, we'll actually see the flight surgeon. That person will be the first person to pop their head in and just do a quick verbal thumbs up with all 4 crew members as an initial gauge on how they're feeling. And you know, based on previous returns and, you know, the way that this one's shaping up, you know, hoping to see 4 thumbs up there. But for the most part, between now and then, Raja, Tom, Kayla, and Matthias are mostly just going to be monitoring where things are in terms of the return process and where we fall in that.
I just want to give another safety reminder. I know that it's nighttime and there probably aren't too many people boating too far off the coast of Florida, but they are splashing down off the coast of Tampa. That's our prime site today based on the weather. And we have our recovery boats out there, or the SpaceX recovery ships, ready to bring them home. This is something that we have coordinated with the U.S. Coast Guard. We also have their patrol boats in the area. So it's all for the safety of not just the crew who have spent 6 months in space, but also the recovery teams and also any or boaters that might be nearby to stay away from the capsule, stay away from the area, and respect the Coast Guard's patrol boats. That way you can watch here, and we promise we will give you the best and all the latest information.
Yeah, I'm looking at range status right now. There's a couple of law enforcement vessels out there, not too many casual, so that's good news. But yeah, so right now we are expecting that entry interface to begin soon. We are actually, it's now at the 30 We should be hearing the call out for LOS, loss of signal, which is expected to last until the 37-minute mark. So we're now at 9:30 p.m. Pacific time, expecting that blackout period to last until 9:37 p.m. Pacific time.
You can see the crowd growing outside of SpaceX Mission Control here in Hawthorne. Everyone watching as we get closer and closer to the main event, which will be splashdown. And these teams here are monitoring the status of the vehicle as well, but again, they don't have to send commands right now. The vehicle knows exactly what to do. It's fully autonomous. So everyone is simply monitoring this. We also have teams in Mission Control Houston at Johnson Space Center who are monitoring the mission, as well as they are 24/7 monitoring the status of the space station itself. And there's your look at Johnson Space Center's Mission Control. All of those team members monitoring the systems aboard the International Space Station, not Crew Dragon itself, but they are still keeping tabs on the mission. And I believe we're already in that loss of signal. Entry interface has begun, so we'll be expecting to hear back from the crew in a few minutes.
Yeah, at this point, we are entering that communications blackout period, which lasts approximately 6 minutes due to plasma formation around the spacecraft. During this time, no vehicle telemetry is received by Mission Control or the recovery team, and no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication is possible. But, of course, Dragon is designed to fly itself during re-entry. The vehicle will be slowing down from an orbital velocity of approximately 17,500 miles per hour. The top temperature that Dragon will experience upon reentry is 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And yeah, as I said before, we're expecting that blackout to last for about 6 or 7 minutes, concluding at 9:37 p.m. Pacific time. Right now, our three crew, I almost said crew 4. I'm getting confused. My brain's still getting confused with all of the crews that we have in space right now. So the crew 3 crew are in their seats, their visors are down, and they are continuing to monitor their screens there to see what their trajectory is and basically what altitude they're at. And by doing so, they're able to prepare for the various events, so they know at roughly what time the drogue parachutes will deploy. That, of course, is a slight change in feeling in terms of what they're experiencing within their seats. So being able to basically brace for that, important to know how high they are. We are expecting those drogues to deploy at about 18,000 feet.
And we're about halfway through the entry interface period, so about 3 more minutes until we expect to acquire signal from Crew Dragon again. Those drogues will slow the vehicle down to about 350 miles per hour. And hopefully sometime soon as the capsule slows, we'll start to get views from the WB-57 that's in the area, as well as potentially from the recovery ship itself. But all of the team members are standing by. They arrived on the ship via helicopter today. And then again, the crew will be flown back to land shortly after landing, within pretty much an hour after they splash down. They will be back on solid ground for the first time in 6 months.
Yeah, and you said they go to a health facility after they come back, correct?
Yes, and that's actually on board the boat itself. So they don't have to wait for any health care, and it could just be that maybe they're, feeling the effects of gravity for the first time.
I would be motion sick for sure.
So they're just there to do those routine health checks and make sure that everyone's feeling as best as they can.
Once again, we are in that expected loss of signal period, that communications blackout period. We're expecting this to last another 3 minutes or so. The crew is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. The heat shield is helping to slow them down significantly. They're going from 17,500 miles per hour, roughly thereabout, to 350 miles per hour. So that heat shield is doing lots of work right now. Of course, when we saw the capsule, the Dragon Endurance docked with the space station all throughout the last 6 months, it was, this brilliant white. That will not be the case the next time that we see Dragon Endurance. It will certainly come back with a little bit of charring on it from that thermal protection system doing its job of protecting the structural integrity of the capsule during re-entry.
To me, it looks a little bit like a toasted marshmallow.
Absolutely.
But we keep the capsule white while on orbit because that helps reflect some of that heat that's coming from the sun. Of course, there's no atmosphere to dissipate any of that heat, and so it's in direct sunlight 45 minutes every day, or every rotation of the Earth. So that helps keep the capsule cool. The same thing on the trunk. We jettisoned the trunk earlier today. That will burn up upon re-entry into the atmosphere. Only the capsule portion is coming home. So the vehicle is running on battery power. Everything has moved really smoothly so far, and we're just about a minute away until we expect acquisition of signal from the Crew Dragon vehicle.
Yeah. Now, once the Crew splashes down, as we said before, the recovery vessel will move into place and retrieve them from the water. A hydraulic lift will basically pick them up and set them into the nest or the cradle on the boat, and then that cradle.
Dragon, SpaceX, com check. Dragon, SpaceX, com check.
Dragon has you, Endurance has you at first.
Great to hear from you.
So as you just heard, we had confirmation from Commander Raja Chari.
And Dragon, SpaceX, expect automated chute deployment.
Endurance copy is expecting automated seat deployment for the start of GPS reacquisition.
We see the same. Expect deployment at standard altitude.
Endurance copy.
So there's our first view of Dragon Endurance making its re-entry to planet Earth.
6 months in space, and this is the first time that these crew members have been in Earth's atmosphere in that time. As you just heard, we're standing by for drogue parachute deploy, so those 2 drogue chutes. The crew members will probably feel a little bit of a jolt as those deploy, but that's why they are strapped into their seats safely, those custom fitted seats. And after the drogues deploy, it'll slow the capsule to about 350 miles per hour before we see the 4 main parachutes deploy, and slow it down to about 15 at the point it'll splash down in the ocean off the coast of Tampa.
Yeah, now right now, or it may have already happened, the seats that the crew members are in actually automatically rotate 26 degrees in order to keep the crew within the acceptable G limits for entry and landing. As I mentioned before, if we didn't have these drogue chutes, which they deploy around 18,000 feet, so we're expecting to see those pop out any moment, without those drogue chutes, we would have to make...
Dragon, SpaceX, brace for drogue window.
So without these drogue chutes, we'd have to make the main parachutes 3 times stronger and heavier. Expecting those drogues to deploy any moment.
And of course, those drogues deploy automatically, but if needed, the crew can deploy them manually. They have a hardline button in the capsule. It's beneath their display where they monitor the mission.
And of course, after the drogue chutes deploy, we'll see those main parachutes, which help to further decelerate the vehicle and allow it to make a soft landing there in the Gulf of Mexico.
Great image of those drogues deploying.
All right, looks like we have 2 healthy drogues there.
And the
Endurance is visual on 2 drogues.
Copy, we see the same. Descent rate nominal.
And if you noticed, as those drogues were
Copy,
deploying,
sorry.
the drogues didn't open up to that full size you saw all the way at first. It's called reefing. They open up more slowly so that it's not as big of a jolt to the capsule and to the parachute system. And again, these will help slow the capsule to 350 miles per hour, which still seems fast, but compared to 17,500.
There we can see the deployment of those main parachutes. The vehicle's velocity is about 119 miles per hour.
Yeah, in SpaceX Dragon, we see 4 chutes, and we could distinctly feel the 2 disc reefs. It looks like final descent race.
Yeah, that reefing action that you just mentioned playing out right in front of us.
And Raja, we see the same.
Excellent views here. 4 main parachutes. These are the last big physical change we'll see for Dragon as it continues its descent. It will slow the capsule down to about 15 miles per hour before splashing down. And teams are in position. They're moving their way closer to where the Dragon will splash down. Again, we'll have some fast boats that will approach the capsule first, ensure it's safe for the recovery ship to approach. And within an hour of these crew members splashing down on Earth, we expect to see them getting out of the
meters.
Copy 800.
Now, for those that might not be familiar with Dragon itself, over the lifespan of the Dragon program, we've had great success with water landing, which is what we are attempting today. We've had with 25 successful splashdowns, and they're
600 meters.
Copy 600.
do that water landing because it's simpler, therefore more reliable, provides more margin against unlikely parachute issues. Now, we did have to learn how to make Dragon waterproof, but once you do that, it's very much a rinse, review, reuse type process.
And splashing down is not necessarily a new technique.
400 meters.
Copy, 400.
Only 400 meters, so getting closer and closer back to planet Earth. But splashing down is also how the Apollo astronauts returned to Earth.
Absolutely.
So this capsule is not dissimilar to this design works very well, I should say. The capsule design when it comes to ablating heat as well as protecting crew members. And a very smooth ride home so far for our astronauts.
200 meters, bracing.
Copy, 200 and bracing.
The teams are about 3 nautical miles away from the splashdown site, so it's going to take them a little bit of time to get there in terms of the large vessel, but there is a fast boat, as we call it, that will be able to get to the capsule very, very quickly, as we will see here in just a couple of moments. Once again, all right, as you can see there on your screen, Dragon Endurance carrying
Endurance, we copy, we see the same, and main attack.
Crew 3 crew has splashed down in the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Florida. So right now, Dragon is
on behalf of the entire SpaceX team, welcome home. Willkommen auf der Erde. It's been an absolute honor to support you on your mission, Endurance crew, and thanks for flying SpaceX.
Thanks, Sarah. We're glad to be back. Thanks for letting us take Endurance on its shakedown cruise. Looking forward to watching many more flights of Endurance in the future. That was a great ride, and enjoyed working with the NASA and SpaceX team. Thanks for getting us to the space station and back safely.
Appreciate the words, Raja.
As you can see on your screen, we have that visual confirmation and verbal confirmation for splashdown of the Dragon spacecraft. Dragon Endurance has returned home, and NASA astronauts Raja, Tom, Kayla, and Matthias are back on Earth after a 23.5-hour return journey from space. Now, as I mentioned before, the SpaceX recovery ship and team has been waiting for Dragon's splashdown, and they will now make their way to the splashdown location.
And that splashdown came at 9:40.
SpaceX Endurance feels like we're in stable 1.
that, and we see the same.
Copy, and confirm we're go then 2 Bravo.2 to raise the Patronis.
And you have a go for raising visors.
Copy, thanks.
Again, splashdown coming at 9:43 p.m. Pacific time. That's 12:43 a.m. on May the 6th in Eastern time, where the crew has splashed down. Stable 1, which you just heard the core call to the crew, means that the vehicle is upright. They've received the go to raise their visors, and they're now waiting for those boats to approach and help pull the capsule up to the recovery ship once it arrives. So the teams have been ready and waiting. They're about 3 nautical miles away, so it takes around 30 minutes to make their way to Raja, Tom, Kayla, and Matthias inside Dragon.
Now, right after splashdown, Dragon actually cuts its parachute lines. That's to make sure that the Dragon capsule isn't pulled in the water if there is a little bit of wind, if the parachutes were to pick up some of that wind. So Dragon immediately cut those parachute lines. The teams will attempt to recover them from the water. The other thing that Dragon does is it intakes a tiny bit of that ocean water intentionally to help stabilize the capsule. So there's a couple of pumps at the bottom that basically flow a tiny bit of that ocean water into designated balloons, basically, to help stabilize the capsule. That allows for the recovery team to make a safer recovery, and also allows the crew to bob around a little bit less while they're in the water waiting. But we can see there that the seas are really fair. As we heard a little while ago, the last reading that we had were half-foot waves, and that looks to be relatively true now.
Yes, I don't know if you could ask for better weather. Just to look ahead at some of the things that are coming.
Dragon, SpaceX, com check over the boat link.
Endurance has you loud and clear.
Copy, com.
Looking ahead, after the splashdown, Mission Control Hawthorne can give the go for safe approach, and then the approach boats that we've talked about will begin inspections. They're checking for hypergalls, which are those noxious fumes that can come off the vehicle. After those ordnance and hypergall checks are complete, we will see Dragon be rigged up, which means it'll be ready for pickup once the recovery ship arrives. So that usually happens again about 30 minutes after splashdown, and then they'll begin to lift Dragon onto the deck. That takes just a couple of minutes, and once they have lifted Dragon into the nest and pulled it toward the recovery platform, we will see the hatch open and our crew 3 astronauts take their first breath of fresh Earth air for the first time in 6 months.
Yeah, once that side hatch is opened, that's the first time it's been opened since liftoff, since launch day. Of course, the crew uses the forward hatch, which is located under the nose cone at the very top of the capsule. They use that forward hatch to get in and out of the space station, but it's that side hatch that is utilized for ingress and egress, or to get in and out of the capsule while it's on Earth. So yeah, when that side hatch opens, it's the first time it's been open since they launched in November.
Dragon, SpaceX, we are go for recovery personnel to approach. You can expect personnel alongside in approximately 1 minute.
Endurance copy, same personnel alongside in about a minute.
All right, those fast boats have gotten the go to move toward the vehicle.
Yeah, so we're now excitedly awaiting the recovery of our Dragon spacecraft with NASA astronauts Raja, Tom, Kayla, and Matthias inside. Dragon has already autonomously completed several steps to safe itself following splashdown. As you can see there, it is patiently waiting in the water for that recovery team. Now, for those of you just joining us, the mission has gone really smoothly so far. Dragon successfully splashed down in the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Tampa just a little bit ago, and as you just heard, we got the okay from the teams to begin the approach.
Yes, that splashdown coming at 9:43 p.m. Pacific. But approximately 23.5 hours ago, Dragon autonomously undocked from the space station. And a good look there at those fast boats.
Dragon SpaceX, request permission to come on board via display camera view only.
Yep, you guys are welcome on board.
Copy that, and work.
Now the crew right now are still in their seats. This is similar to when you arrive on an airplane. You have landed on the tarmac, but you're not at the gate yet. You don't want to take off those seatbelts just yet. So they are allowing the teams here in Hawthorne to take a look inside the vehicle as these fast boats approach. But just a look back at yesterday, we saw them undock from the space station and complete a series of departure burns. They jettisoned the trunk.
SpaceX Endurance, we've got a tally on recovery lights. And only one complaint is these water bottles are super heavy.
Copy that, Raja. We'll work on it.
Raj, of course, making a gravity joke there.
Yeah, for the first time in 6 months, everything has a little more weight to it now that they're back in 1G on Earth. But today we saw them jettison that trunk section and perform the final burn, that deorbit burn, very shortly ago to place them on the trajectory we had them toward the Gulf of Mexico. They successfully re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, made it through that entry interface, which we had that loss of comm as we expected, and then regained shortly after. And then the deployment of the parachutes, which slowed the spacecraft down to a gentle splashdown. We had amazing views of that tonight. And so we're now following the final part of Raja, Tom, Kayla, and Matthias' journey as Dragon is lifted out of the water and placed on the recovery boat. Not there quite yet, but sooner than later.
Yeah. As I said before, upon detection of landing, Dragon automatically releases the main parachutes to prevent wind from pulling on the spacecraft. Dragon then autonomously safes any pyrotechnics that are still present on the vehicle and may automatically perform additional minor system reconfigurations. As Leah mentioned, the astronauts remain seated in their seats and they keep their suits on, but the onboard air conditioning keeps the temperatures in check inside the spacecraft, nice and cool, and the communication systems on board remain powered so the crew can continue to communicate and make funny jokes.
And of course, this is a view inside the capsule. So you can see Raja there on the left has taken off his gloves, still has his suits on, and has been able to raise his visor. This is their first time back on Earth in 6 months, and they're just still monitoring the area around them. We heard them say that they had sights on one of those fast boats. SpaceX has 2 fast boats in the recovery fleet, and they've moved quickly to the splashdown point. They are being followed tonight by Shannon, the main recovery vessel named after Shannon Walker, NASA astronaut. And that will move into the position upwind of the spacecraft. So here's a good picture of those 2 fast boats. They both have very specific roles. The first approach is focused on immediate safety inspection of the capsule integrity and checking for any presence of those hypergolic propellant vapors, making sure it's safe for Shannon, the recovery boat, to approach the Dragon spacecraft. So once the capsule is cleared for full approach, the team begins rigging the capsule for water recovery by the recovery ship. Meanwhile, the second fast boat, which you can see in the background, is responsible for parachute recovery, and it also serves as a redundant boat to the first. We love having a backup for everything. And we'll also see a team member on a jet ski helping to gather up the now detached parachutes.
As we said, the recovery vessel Shannon, it's making its way. It's not as fast as the fast boats. But what the folks are doing there on the fast boat, whenever they do the initial approach, they actually perform tests to make sure that the hypergolic propellants, the vapors from those propellants, are not present. So the monomethyl hydrazine and the nitrogen tetroxide, MMH and NTO, are toxic if you breathe them in. And so the crew, the first thing they do when they arrive, they are wearing safety gear so that they are not breathing anything, and they have a device that is performing checks to see if any of those hypergolic vapors are present. When they get the all clear, then they're able to further, the recovery process. It'll take a little over 10 minutes for the recovery crew to complete those safety checks. Once complete, the team will begin preparing Dragon to be lifted into the recovery vessel. As part of the preparation for this lift, one member of the recovery team will actually climb on top of the capsule so that they can attach Dragon's hoist rings and connect the lifting rings. That's always really fun to see. I promise you the amount of training that individual goes through is quite extensive. Oh wow, that's a great view. Not thermal this time. Beautiful colors there with the various lights that we have going on. You have a better view. The individual that is actually on Dragon capsule now, that's the person I was just talking about, that will be attaching Dragon's hoist rings and connect the lifting lines. So it'll take us less than an hour to raise Dragon to the recovery boat and remove the crew from the spacecraft. As Leah mentioned before, there's very standard medical checkouts. The crew will return to land within 4 hours by helicopter. If no additional medical assistance is needed, the crew will board a waiting NASA plane and depart for Houston. Now for Matthias, the European Space Agency has a plane that will take him to Europe. So he really has a much further journey
yes.
to get home.
Those European flights are a little bit longer.
Yeah. Once again, that's a live view inside Dragon Endurance.
Dragon SpaceX, hyperglass sweeps and unfired ordnance checks were nominal. Rigging is in progress. Approximately 7 minutes until capsule lift. Stand by for a PMC with the SpaceX flight surgeon.
And Dragon copies, checks are complete in about 7 minutes to lift, and stand by for PMC.
And that person on the outside of